Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michelle Desrochers and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night segment of The Outer Realm. We are broadcasting a pre-recorded show this evening on the United Public Radio, UFO Paranormal Radio 105.3 from the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM from New Orleans. We're fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee who have been a part of our journey since the very beginning. So thank you, Folgers. We wouldn't or couldn't do it without you. Also, big thank you to Justice Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, for this contribution of his voice, his music, for the intro that you just heard. So big thank you to him. He's an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, and we wouldn't have it any other way. You can find it on all of your favorite music streaming platforms. Also, big shout out to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind all the banners and logos here at the show. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. Also specializes in the horror and macabre genres, but can do fabulous commission pieces of any sort. So big thank you to Steve. Now, we are proud, of course, to announce once again that we are a sponsor of the upcoming Contact and Disclosure Symposium 2024, which will be taking place on April 20th. Let me correct that, 10 until 5 p.m. at the Off-World Bar in Toronto, Ontario. So check it out. They're doing this for the first time, and they're going to have some great guests lined up. The people who are putting it on are pretty fantastic and very well versed. So check them out. Also, happy to announce that for year 2, we will be sponsoring the Halifax Paranormal Symposium, which is going to be held Saturday, October the 12th, 2024 at the Halifax Tower Hotel and Conference Center from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. So last year was a huge hit, and I'm sure this year is not going to be any different. So tonight we welcome back our dear friend Mark Olly, and we're going to have a little bit of a controversial show tonight. Yes, we are. We're going to be discussing whether or not we've actually landed on the moon. We're going to look at some of the conspiracy theories. We might even look at the ones that have been allegedly debunked. I say alleged because, there's a lot with all of that. We have a lot of diehard people that say, absolutely, we definitely went to the moon. And other people like, no, absolutely not. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate as Mark goes along with some of this debunking stuff, which I found some pretty good stuff. So we're going to take it from there and see. So guys, please, I will be in the chat room with you guys tonight. So when you start watching the show, find me on the Outer Realm chat, and we will have our little bantering and commenting back and forth at that point. Alrighty. So without further ado, hello.
Hey. Hiya.
How are you?
Yeah, not so bad. Prepared for some lunacy.
Oh, boy.
Lunacy. Oh, there you go. Straight in. Yeah.
Lunacy. I know. I love it. I love it. We've been talking about this for a little bit. I know we touched on it after the last show, and I had to do my homework on this. I didn't really want to do the typical stuff that everybody talks about. I actually wanted to look up some of these theories that you're going to put forward, and I'm happy to I got a couple sites up, so I've done my homework a little bit, because there's so much on this. It's just been really talked about a lot, and this is a bone of contention with a lot of people, I think, from both sides. You got one side that's saying it never happened, and you have the other side's like, yes, it did, and we're tired of having to prove that it didn't.
Yes. I mean, from my point of view, I've done this as a hobby. I
Right.
was alive when it happened. I can
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
vaguely remember watching it on a tiny little black and white TV. So
Right.
it kind of fascinated me at the time. But
Right.
then, having been there, I kind of had my doubts, and I was watching it and I was thinking there's one or two bits here just don't quite add up. And then that has kind of built over years and years and years, and the more I've got involved in television production,
Right.
and I've seen what goes on behind the scenes and I know what's possible,
Right.
the more I look back with skeptical eyes.
Right.
It's one of those things. It just depends where you're at as
Right.
to how you view this. Mentioning playing devil's advocate, I mean, for years I have played devil's advocate, and I've kind of, is it? Was it?
Right.
Is that how it is? I've kind of, for years, but I suppose
Right.
in the last couple of years, I've really come out and said, well, I'm going to take up the alternative view. I'm going to take up a
Oh,
negative position.
the
and see
alternative
what takes
view.
us.
Well, I have to say, I too was alive, but I was
Yeah.
quite young when this happened. My mother worked with a priest, a Jesuit priest, out of a big university up north in northern Canada, and NASA would send him things on occasion, and looking at photos of crafts and things like that. Everything blacked out, of course, but it was her job to put a lot of this together for him properly, and so he can analyze it himself. Part of all of the stuff he was involved with was being in communication with the astronauts at the time, because apparently the city called Sudbury is nicknamed, I think it was Moon City, because of the terrain, which allegedly looked a lot like what they figured did on the moon, because it was hit by an asteroid like years and years ago. So the parts of
Right.
it are just like desolate. And this is where they went to, I guess, prep, shall we say. But she would tell stories about, no, I was in communication with astronauts and, via NASA. And there was a whole lot to this. I guess from what you're saying, it's like, where were they communicating from? Is what I'm
I
getting.
mean, launching straight in. Okay. I
Yeah,
mean,
let's
NASA,
just go.
If you ask NASA now, they'll say, "Oh, we've lost all the data. We've lost this. We've lost the other. We can't do it anymore because we don't have the technology we've got now. We did it back then." There are all kinds of tons of excuses.
Right.
But there was quite a turning point a couple of years ago where one of the reels of recording tape that was taken at the time actually got leaked out. And apparently there were two different feeds on this reel. There's what you hear, which basically is control talking to the astronauts.
Right.
And then there's another feed, which is very clearly a director. So the delay, there's a few seconds delay. So what you're hearing, so when it's coming through the radio or television or on soundtrack or whatever, that's feed number one, which is obviously NASA talking to the astronauts talking back.
Right.
But then there's an actual gap which is edited out, and in the gap you can hear instructions being fed in.
Right.
So even at that point, you're at the stage where you're saying, right, well, everything we've heard is choreographed, it's directed at that point. So even these people who say, oh, well, I heard it, I heard the communications and this, that, and the other, and aside from the technical problems, you know what I mean? I mean, you've got President of America picks up a telephone, and I'm speaking to the astronauts on the moon, at which point everybody falls about laughing, because that was just impossible. You couldn't do that.
Right.
So clearly there are aspects of that technical side of it that leave massive holes. But the communication, that is quite a key thing. What you hear is not what was going on. You're not hearing all of it. There was more going on in the background. Again, starts the alarm bells ringing, straight away. And I believe it was President Nixon that made that phone call. So, I'm just going to leave that there.
Right. Because
no, go on.
I mean, I have to say, like if we're getting into stuff, you get let's say Neil Armstrong. Like the astronauts, when they came back from that mission, allegedly even when they were interviewing them, you could see that there was something completely not right with them. They looked really either distraught, tired, things maybe they were told not to talk about. But, Neil Armstrong, there's actually a belief system, according to Bill Tompkins, right, where they got there and saw reptilians and all these ships on the other side. And because there's a whole conspiracy that follows this as well. They were like 9 feet tall, standing next to their aircrafts. There were hundreds of them out there. They were ugly as sin. And, and people are wondering, well, like if it works anything like it does in the deep ocean, wouldn't you just not kind of like implode or do something like?
Well, yeah, there is that. Honestly, don't even get me started on that, because there's
right.
What I tend to do is you've got these two, like you say, almost like two buckets full of stuff.
Right.
One is the bucket full of stuff that says we didn't do it,
right,
and that creates all kinds of stuff, and that's kind of the direction I've gone in. And then there's the other bucket full of stuff that says yes, we did do it, but they're not telling us everything.
Right.
So that bucket's full of conspiracy theories. Okay, the bucket that's full of conspiracy theories is extraordinarily thin when it comes to evidence.
Okay.
Bearing in mind I'm an archaeologist, so show me. That's my argument. Show me. Well, whereas the other one, the one that says we didn't go, has got more evidence, in my opinion, to say we didn't go than there's evidence to say that we did. And that's the problem. From a factual, evidential point of view, the whole argument that we went to the moon just collapses. It falls apart.
So then why don't we start with that? Let's look at the big book of why you feel that it didn't happen. Maybe there might be a conspiracy or so in there that we can touch on. If not, we'll talk about those after. So I'm going to let you take it as to what you feel.
Well, how fast do you want me to kill it flat?
Well, we got to stretch out a little bit of time, so don't let it hurt too fast.
Well, first of all, let's get the elephant out of the room, because the elephant that is in the room, is the fact that at that point in history, there's over 200,000 significant objects flying in Earth's close orbit. So let's talk science. You've got two Van Allen belts. You've got the inner belt and the outer belt, and both of these belts are created by gravitational fields that are on the Earth. So in the lower Van Allen belt, you've got debris floating around, and in the upper Van Allen belt, you've also got debris floating around. And then there's a gap between the two. I think it's called the sweet spot, or whatever, the safe zone. It's got a name anyway. It's a certain zone. When they do things like chuck satellites up, or they throw up space shuttles, or they go, hey, look, we're in outer space. No, they're not. They're in that gap. They're in the gap between the two Van Allen belts. The reason for that is if you try and put anything through the Van Allen belt, it's basically like chucking a tin can through 1,000 shotgun blasts every minute. There's debris whizzing around 1,600 plus miles an hour. This debris is traveling at. So basically what you're trying to do is get something out through that. Now, the guys that believe it and think we did go, their argument is, well, you don't get as much debris around the North and South Pole. There's gaps. Okay, that's absolutely true. There are gaps. There's no gap big enough to send a rocket through. You can't actually send anything through, because it only takes a piece of rubble the size of a pea traveling at 1,600 miles an hour to take out an entire space station. It just goes boom, like you see in the science fiction movies. So literally, physically, scientifically, there isn't really any way of getting off this rock. There isn't any way of getting outside of gravity. Now, that's also, surprisingly, backed up by the Russians. The Russians are now saying that there's been so much debris chucked up there. There's so much, rubbish that we've deposited. There's now over 400,000 significant pieces up there. And they reckon by the time it gets to about 600,000 pieces, we will not be able to go into higher orbit without the risk of collision. Now, what I'm talking about here is physical. This is a physical set of facts. So there was enough stuff floating around up there to stop us ever getting anywhere back in the 1960s. We were never going to get off this rock. Okay, bear that in mind, because that's where we're coming from. That's where we're starting from. So you're beginning with a basic scientific proposition that is an impossibility. Right. Okay.
Right.
Moving forward, as soon as you do get out of the Van Allen belt, so you're like, hey, we've done it.
We found a way.
Got out. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Space is not a vacuum. All the scientists, every single one of them, to a man, will tell you it's not a vacuum. So you've got your meteorites, your comets, your flying debris, bits of rocks going everywhere. And don't tell me they know where these are, because they don't know where they are.
They move around.
They come and go. You know, you're talking about flipping universe here. And then you've got solar winds, you've got heat, you've got radiation. You know, there's radiation coming from the sun and from everywhere else. And then you've got all the usual different wavelengths and frequencies that are bandied about that we're not always aware of. Well, turn the clock back in the 1960s or whatever, there was a lot of stuff floating around that they weren't aware of. You know what I mean? And all that exists outside the Van Allen belt. Right. So at the very least, you would have to get your little tin can with its, you know, jet coming out the back. You'd have to get that through 2 Van Allen belts out of the gravitational force of planet Earth. You'd have to do it so precisely that you manage to dodge all of that. And as soon as you get outside the outer Van Allen belt, you're going to get microwaved anyway. Before you even hit the moon. That's before you get anywhere near it. Okay.
Right.
This is brand new, actually. This is quite exclusive, because the other day somebody sent me a photograph. You can Google this, of the woman who did the calculations. Now, she's quite a famous lady. Nothing against her, but she did all these calculations for how we got to the moon. And it's a wonderful photograph from the 1960s. She stood there and she has this stack of physical data, because that's how it was done. She has all these books and files of physical data all stacked up next to it. It's a very, very famous photograph. I think it had been recolored from black and white, so they did put it back out again.
Right.
And I'm looking at this pile of data. Now, let's be generous and say she's about 5'6" tall.
Right.
This pile of data, which is tens of thousands of pages, is taller than her. I write books. I've never had a book back ever that's not got mistakes.
Right.
Now, what they're saying is that every digit, individual, microscopically small digits of data that is in that stack, they're saying that every single digit was calculated correctly, written down correctly, put into that tower of paperwork correctly. Bearing in mind they didn't have computers like we've got now, so they would have done most of it by hand. And then once she's done that and she's got this 5'6" stack of paperwork correct, some beggar else has to put that into the machine to get the spaceship to the moon. And they've only got to get one digit wrong and the whole lot just goes to pot. No way. Right. I'm not a mathematician, but I'm sure there are mathematicians out there. Statistically, that is a physical impossibility. There is no way, through all the stages required, that quantity of data could have been generated in the first place correctly, transmitted using those methods correctly, then arrived at NASA and been inputted into the machinery correctly, and then that machinery operate correctly. I refuse to believe statistically that that's actually possible. And they're saying not only did we do it once, but we did that for all of them. No, it's ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. And that's me just kicking off with the science. That's like, how do we get off this rock? You know, that's right at the very beginning.
Well, let me chime in. Let me chime in for a moment. Okay, well, 2 things as far as getting off the rock. I mean, we know that there are crafts coming in of some sort, right? I mean, we've got, hypothetically, we know there are UFOs floating about someplace, you know. Are they coming in through portals, stargates, light gates?
Yeah.
Is it possible that we could hit a light gate?
Well, I'm kind of saying I can tell you where they're not coming from.
Right.
I've put this. I put this in writing. Actually,
sometimes it's kind of nice to think we can actually get off this damn planet.
Well, crystal skulls and human heads. The bit on the end of that, I actually say, you know, these things they're not coming flying sweetly in through, you know, from outer space through the Van Allen belt.
Right.
Unless they've got enormous amounts of superior technology that will protect them
which I would
fundamentally against radiation and impact.
Right.
So,
which we know that our stuff doesn't, at least the stuff that we know about.
It
that
didn't.
took
It
them
didn't
to
in
the moon.
1960. It didn't back in the 60s.
Well, we've had 2 accidents just with the tiles on.
Well, that's another thing. I
Right?
wasn't even going to go there. You know, if you can blow a tile off a space shuttle and it's boom, you know what I mean? Plus the fact, Challenger, they actually say that the astronauts are still alive and all living somewhere else, and that was staged as a means to bring that program to an end. So there's a conspiracy theory for you straight away. And you can actually Google that and you can go find the photographs of where those astronauts are living now. They've been outed. So, but if you can blow a tile, you blow a tile off. How the hell are you going to get something that, well, don't even get me started on the lunar lander. Well, you can. I mean, if you want a entertaining few minutes, get me started on the moon landing.
Of course.
Okay.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Launch in. I mean, we were on flying saucers, and yes, basically in your question about flying saucers, yes, I mean, they could come in through wormholes. They could come interdimensionally. They can dematerialize and rematerialize, which clearly they can do. They're traveling at enormous speeds, so 1,600 miles an hour. If you're coming in at like 10,000 miles an hour, everything is standing still.
Right.
Because of the laws of physics and the laws of science and the things we know now. I don't rule out the possibility of flying saucers. They don't, surprisingly. What they do is they do rule out, sending a tin can to the moon. It rules that out. But the moon landing is brilliant. I usually open up with the moon landing, actually, because it's so funny. This one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. I mean, that had me rolling with laughter when I saw that in black and white. The guys coming down the steps, like, one small step for a man. There's a great photograph as well on, I'll start off with this. Time magazine, there's a colour photograph of him coming down the steps.
Right.
And on the cover of Time magazine, one of his legs, I think it's his right leg, is sticking out at 90 degrees because he's obviously doing it like, alternate. And they take the photo and his leg's sticking out. At no point does that ever happen in the footage. Never. His leg never sticks out. He bounces down, okay?
Right.
And he lands on the lunar surface. And then he's the first man to land on the moon. And then there's some bloke who's about 30 meters away filming it. Otherwise, that footage wouldn't exist. So who filmed it? That's the first man on the moon. Whoever's operating that camera is the first man on the moon. Now, there's all kinds of excuses. These guys out there are going to be chewing the knuckles off now, going, well, I know how they did that. It was, stuck on an arm on the side of the lunar lander, or, they flew it out, or come up with 10 million different excuses. There is no way that camera would have survived the landing. It's impossible. He has been filmed doing that.
Right.
And then I'm going to really kind of cut this short.
All right, do it. Let's go. This is a conspiracy show. Let's go for it.
As soon as, now I've met the guy that did this. Now I met him quite a long time ago, about 20, 25 years ago. And he was the guy who looked at the photographs and he said, hang on a minute. He said, I'm a photographer, and you're telling me that these pin-sharp, crystal clear photographs have been taken by somebody with a Hasselblad strapped to the chest,
right,
with no viewer. And he started off, because I went to a talk that he did. I met him afterwards, and we had like 3 hours over the bar afterwards doing exactly what I'm doing now. And he said, these things, he said, the Hasselblad film, he said, at this point in history, you can't send a film through an airport scanner because it'll corrupt and destroy the film.
Yes, absolutely.
But you can get one wrapped in tin foil from the moon to Earth and get pin-sharp photos. He said, no. He said, that's never happened. That's never happened. And he said, if you look at the framing of how these things are framed, he said, they're not taken. They cannot be taken with a camera strapped to somebody's chest.
Right.
And he said, and then once you get past that and you start looking at these shots, he said, there's 3 or 4 different light sources. Well, there should only be one light source on the moon, and that should be the sun. You might, if you're lucky, get some reflection off the Earth.
I have some debunking stuff over that light thing, but you keep going.
Yeah, well, let me go for this. But he said, he said in some of them you can see the lights reflected.
Right.
He said in any shining surfaces. And now he's a photographer, so he's got all of these pictures. He's got the NASA high-res pictures, and he's blown them up. So he was showing actual, lighting brackets and lighting gantries reflected.
Right.
And then he said, well, you've got other problems as well. He said they're scudding round, the moon and this, that, and the other, and the tracks and the footprints don't add up. He said none of that matches. He said you also got the problem the lunar lander's come down. It's landed on the lunar surface. He said there's no crater underneath it. Mm-hmm. So it's been craned in and lowered onto the surface and put in position. He said because there's no evidence whatsoever of it landing. He said it's never gone off and come back again. He said that's never happened. Mm. He said so that's a major problem. He said when you take the footage, the actual moving images of them running round on the lunar surface, he said if you just turn them down by speed them up by 50%. He said they've been slowed down. He said they're all running at half speed. He said as soon as you put them up by 50% back to normal speed again, they're all moving at normal speed. Mm. Now, the internet is riddled with outtakes where things have gone wrong, where people have fallen over when they're on wires and they're trying to get back up again. And so there is so much out there. I could do a whole night just on things that are wrong with the footage side of it, without even going into, I mean, the lunar lander as well, there's some great photographs of that. And it's clear that it's been lit from many different positions in order to blow in the different areas that wouldn't be visible because they'd be in shadow. Then you've got, I mean, other problems with the footage. You've got the flag, moving when it shouldn't be moving because there shouldn't be any breeze on the moon. It shouldn't do that. The dust and other things that get kicked up don't behave the way they should do in an anti-gravity situation. If you kick a rock, it should just keep going till it disappears into space, not drop back to ground again. Some of the backgrounds as well are the same on footage from different landings. You can match up the footage from different landings to see that it's been filmed at the same place. Right. So clearly looking at what we're seeing, I mean, there's nice to put a cap on this section, actually, because there is a brilliant one. You've got all this commentary coming in. It's black and white. You can see the lander. It's sat there. They're coming home. You know what I mean? Boom, massive explosion. All this debris comes flying at the camera, and off goes this capsule. You can see it going. It's off into space. Space, which incidentally, it's always been a criticism, space which has no stars. So that's a problem. Where's the rest of the light sources? Anyway, this capsule goes flying off. Off it goes. Absolutely superb. Okay. Right. Who operated the camera? Because the camera follows it. Typical. I mean, you're down to like kiddies' TV standards here. How did they film that? How did they get the footage from the camera? Because there was nobody left on the moon. They filmed it going and it went off and it blasted off into space. And somebody followed it. They panned the camera up. It's ridiculous. When you actually think about it, absolutely ridiculous. There's no way that was real. And then when the capsule's gone flying off, and you're talking here about a capsule that's made up of cardboard, paper, tin foil, and all the rest of it, because that's what it is. It's a set. You can see it's a set. Nobody would argue that it's not a set. This thing's flying off into space. Well, it's nonsense. It's a model. It's clearly been staged. It's a model. Then you've got other problems as well. Okay. There's your beautiful pod, your lander, there it is. I mean, we're only talking about the first moon landing here. Fantastic, superb. Where the hell did they put that vehicle? The thing that's driving over the surface. There's no space. If you look at the size of the vehicle and the wheels and all the parts they put together for that thing that goes driving over the surface of the moon, there's nowhere to put it. There isn't anywhere to fit it in the capsule. The other criticism is, where's the fuel? There's nowhere to put any fuel in that capsule. They didn't have the fuel and battery technology that we have now. There was nothing miniaturized. So when it goes boom and all this debris flies at you and it goes flying off into space, there's nowhere to put the fuel. So at this point, I mean, I've absolutely savaged it. Now, if you want kind of additional evidence, people are saying, well, is it? What's going on? You've got the very famous Stanley Kubrick just before he dies, was filmed. I mean, it's all over the internet and people have gone, well, that's not Stanley Kubrick. That's been staged. He actually admits he filmed it. He actually does it. He says that to camera. He says, I did it. I was paid. I've got nothing to lose now. I'm going to die. I've got whatever, cancer or whatever. I'm dying. So I'm going to leave this footage behind to say that I did it. People who know Kubrick, people who knew Kubrick and worked with him, have authorized that footage as genuine. It's Kubrick telling you he did it. And then there were other clues. They gave you other clues. Okay. Here's a great one. I'll tell you a story because I love telling stories. I can see you enjoying this. You've got a smile on your face.
Okay. You always entertain me, Mark. I love it.
Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. You're going to love this one. Ian Fleming, 007. Everybody will know where this is going. There's Ian Fleming. He's writing Live and Let Die. You know, no, Diamonds Are Forever. Sorry. He's writing Diamonds Are Forever, Ian Fleming. So he writes the book, Diamonds Are Forever. It gets published. Along come the movie people and go, hey, yeah, we love this. We're going to add this to our James Bond series. So they filmed Diamonds Are Forever. And the only bit of Diamonds Are Forever that's not in the book is the bit where he breaks into an American base and steals a moon buggy. That whole scene of him walking across the lunar surface with these guys bouncing in the background who are clearly on wires. And then he finds this moon buggy. He's like, hey, it's called the moon buggy ride. So he steals a moon buggy, rides out and escapes the base. That's not in the book. It's not there. So then you've got to start thinking, what the hell was Hollywood telling us? Most people have said that set was the moon set. And what they did was they just realized they had it and it was vacant. Nobody was using it. So they just did it and they redid it as an extra for the Bond movie, you know, because they were looking to take Bond into space ultimately later on in the movie franchise. So they just put that in because it was free. But also other people have said, well, no, it's the producer telling you how it was faked. You know, it's showing you that that's how they did it. Now, I'm throwing out the popular things here. I mean, I'm chucking these out and I'm saying to people, go and look it up. It's all on the web. You can go and see it. You know, this evidence is out there. You know, some of it's common sense, some of it's science.
Right.
You know,
right.
There you go.
There's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in. So let me just go and address a couple of the things I mentioned before. Before we get too far ahead of things. Okay. So this site is the Royal Museums of Greenwich. Okay. And talks about the conspiracy that the moon landings were faked. Apollo 11 didn't happen. Humans never stepped foot on the moon. Heard it all before. Okay, here's some conspiracy theories that have proved wrongingly persistent in the last 50 years. One, of course, is conspiracy theory number one. Shadows in the moon landing photos prove the images were faked. So if you take a look at these images, let me just see if I can do this. Hold on. Why don't we just do this? So people
just to fill in time.
But just so people at home can see what we're talking about, right? With this.
What I was going to say is I'm not making. I'm not taking my.
No. So here's the picture right here.
I'm not
just so people can understand, right?
Yeah, I'm not using the shadows in my argument.
Yeah. He goes, well, he says, so if you take a look of the panorama on the NASA website, look closely at the shadows cast. Okay, Neil Armstrong. They're not parallel. This image has been taken as proof by conspiracy theorists that the moon landings were faked. Okay, so we're going to go. The sun, surely if the sun was the only light source, then the shadows should have been parallel. Well, okay, we'll jump ahead. It says, no. This is on the surface of the moon, but we can reproduce this effect anytime we want to on Earth. Okay, so you've all seen this phenomenon yourself where because of the perspective, parallel lines appear to be non-parallel. If you were trying to reduce on a two-dimensional plane or three-dimensional situation, you can make the lines do all sorts of weird things. Go outside in the sun and try it. So they're saying they're debunk it. What are your thoughts on that?
That's absolute, complete and utter nonsense.
Okay.
It's very, very, very simple to debunk that. And that is, if we can do it on Earth, that doesn't necessarily prove anything to do with the moon. Right. I was hoping it was a better argument. There's a better argument that says that actually the photographs were taken in sections. And what they have to do is when they bring them back, they stitch them together. So you get these little crosses that, you know what I mean? So because over a period of time, the shadows will have moved. So you can end up with the same image with them going in two different directions. That's a better explanation.
Right.
But then you've also got to remember how far back do you go? Because if you go back further, just take a few steps back. How the hell did they get the photo in the first place?
Which is something that, they seem to not be addressing.
So, it's very often the debunkers are the guys that leave the information out. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to really stick your neck out and say that that's genuine, then I would argue that it's their job to prove that it's genuine.
Right.
They can't argue that the fakers have got the wrong argument, or, they
Right.
can't say conspiracists have got the wrong argument when they fail to prove that the source material's real.
Right.
I can throw up loads of fake stuff and we can argue till the cows come home, but at the end of the day, it's still fake.
Right.
They've failed to, they would definitely fail in a court of law to prove their argument. There's no doubt about it, because the photos shouldn't exist in the first place.
Right. Right.
Oh, let me just throw another one in as well.
Yeah,
About
go ahead.
I've got several photographs. I've got one is a glass slide. There's a couple of prints, and I think I've got a negative, which is from the period 1875 to 1895, and it's allegedly the surface of the moon taken through a telescope. Now, I don't know what people think, but especially the glass slide I've got is a humdinger, because you're looking across the surface of the moon at a crater that has an impact in the middle of it. Now, clearly these are, imaginary reconstructions of what they would have thought it would have looked like. They didn't really have the technology to, photograph, a flat plane shot of the surface of the moon back then. But, and this is the kicker, by sheer coincidence, all the photographs that have come out since all look the same. They all look exactly like the ones that were taken in the Victorian era. So they've just perpetuated it over generations. So we end up looking at what we expect to look at. And here's another question as well. Time magazine, and this photographer, a friend of mine, pointed this out. A lot of the photographs in Time magazine are in colour. Why are all the photographs of the moon always in black and white? Why? It's just wrong. That shouldn't be happening. Now we've got the technology to actually photograph the moon just through a normal telescope. There's a bloke just up the road here that does it on a regular basis. His photographs are all in colour. The moon looks fantastic in colour because it reflects sunlight in all the different.
Is it a sign of the times? I mean, we did have colour TV back then. I'm pretty sure.
They could have done colour in the first place because Time magazine has got it. Now, even if they recolour them, the argument is still there. Why do they persist in coming up with these black and white images? It's totally unnecessary. So again, you're looking at this playing to what people expect to see, playing to the public concept of what was going on,
Right. So basically the color of space isn't really, that's a little plug to our friend Richard Stanley, who's the director of the movie. So,
yeah, there you go.
But yeah, okay. So let's go into conspiracy theory 2, which is something you've already mentioned. For the most part, Apollo astronauts could not have survived Earth's radiation field, known as the Van Allen radiation belt. So there's a lot of, again,
it's sidestepping, because it's not the radiation I'm concerned with. It's the 200,000 objects whizzing at 1,600 miles an hour. That's your problem. So it's not necessarily just the radiation. It's the actual physical, trying to get out of that amount of debris.
Well, the reason for this, the answer, according to Professor, and I'm probably just going to butcher this poor man's name, Oya, Ojha. He has a killer reply. My answer to that is firewalking. If you've ever done firewalking, you'll know the one thing you don't do is linger around in the middle of the fire pit. You cross it as quickly as you can. From a science point of view, as long as you walk across quickly, looking at thermal conductivity on your feet, you are not going to have enough thermal energy going to the soles of your feet to burn you. In a similar way, the transit time to the Van Allen radiation belt right at the beginning of the Apollo voyages were incredibly short, traveling through the Van Allen. And again, I think they get around it by saying radiation belt, perhaps. No problem whatsoever.
I answered that at the beginning. I mean, it's brilliant because you're coming up with all these different theories, and I've already debunked them before you've even come up with the science side.
That's why I'm here.
But, you get out of the Van Allen belt, and it's using the firewalking analogy, it's like the entire forest is on fire. You're trying to walk through a forest that's on fire. You're only going to go so far before you burst into flames. It's not just a nice, neat little belt that sits around planet Earth. In fact, your problems only begin when you get out of that. Once you get into space, once you're into interstellar space, then you're microwaved, basically. That's the problem. And not just by the microwaves that we know about and we live with every day, but by everything else that's flying around in space, you know, unfiltered sunlight. I mean, you know, science can't have its cake and eat it. You know, either you can't sunbathe because you're going to get cancer.
Right.
Or you can, and not only that, you can get out of the Van Allen belt and go strolling through space and not get microwaved. So you can't have your cake and eat it. It's either one of it's true or not. As soon as that filter that we live under is removed, you're just going to burn. You know, and again, the question's still there. You know, these guys are running around, like you say, in these tinfoil suits with these glass, you know, visors or whatever. Yeah, it's all super technology, blah, blah, etc. None of them, as far as I know, have ever died of cancer. It just makes a nonsense out of what we know as earthbound science and what we know as living on planet Earth. What they're claiming they're capable of doing, it's just so easy to make nonsense out of it. You know, they should all have dropped dead with, you know, from cancer within a couple of years. Think of the soldiers who watched the nuclear tests. Boom, boom, you know, the atom bomb goes off. It's whatever. 2 megaton thing goes off, big flash, you know, within 10 years, they're all dead of cancer. Now, you're talking about the biggest atomic blast in the universe. You're talking about the sun. You know, let's put this in context here. Right. You know, if we didn't have the filter around the Earth, it would turn us into Mars. You'd have no planet. And you're talking about these guys the size of ants in a tin can, just, you know, yeah, we'll sail through it. Right. No, I'm sorry, that guy, I'm sure he's got a made-up name as well. I think it's utter nonsense. You know, that's the worst kind of debunking that. But there you go. Right. I'm going to get shot after this. I'm going to have the men in black knocking on the front door going, hi.
You probably were, because I'm only on number 3.
Oh, dear.
Okay. Conspiracy Theory 3. Why are there no stars in the pictures of the NASA moon landings? So,
or other planets, for that matter.
Okay. It should be filled with stars. After all, there's no atmosphere to distort the image, no clouds to interrupt that glorious view. Conspiracy theorists argue the lack of stars in the Apollo 11 mission photographs prove the event was staged. Well, NASA could not have faked the full wonder of the lunar sky, and so they simply chose not to include any stars at all. Another solution: both the astronauts and the lunar landscape itself are brightly lit by the sun. The sky may look black, but remember, this is, in fact, daytime on the moon. If you're going to take a photo in a brightly lit scene, your camera shutter speed needs to be fast and your aperture incredibly small. In that situation, faint objects like stars simply aren't going to show up. Debunked.
No. You knew I was going to say that.
Just saying. Okay.
The guy I chatted to about 20 odd years ago made a really good point, and that is, okay, why then does the Earth appear the same in all the photos? It looks like a cutout. That's because it is a cutout. So that's daytime on the moon. That doesn't work, because if it is, then you'd have a different view. You'd have a different shadow. You'd have a different angle on the Earth during a series of photos, you know, as the whole planet's turning. And then people are going to say, oh, well, that doesn't work because the moon's stuck on the atmosphere and you always have the same side facing the Earth, so it always looks the same. But no, there would still be elements of change taking place, and you'd see different sides of the Earth if it's going round doing its normal orbit. So the angle of the sun, of course, the angle of the sun is what affects all your lighting, your shadows and everything else. So you'd expect some changes. But this guy who's analysed certainly the first set, so we're talking about specifically the first landings on the moon and the first photos that were generated by that, the Earth is essentially the same in every shot.
Right.
So it doesn't solve that, you know. And again, like I say, daytime, you know, clarity, all the rest of it. Where's the planets, you know?
Right. In all
They're
that.
not stars. It doesn't cover that, you know. So it's a nice excuse that will fool some people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time, I'm afraid. Go on, I'm loving this. You're the first person to let me do this. Actually, go live and savage it live on air. You know.
I know. It will be. So you just won't get all the bantering included. Number 4, the Apollo 11 U.S. flag is waving in the wind, but there is no wind on the moon. So this is one of the crowning moments in terms of U.S. national pride. And again, this is rmg.co.uk. I will put this up in the write-up too, just to give credit. So Buzz Aldrin saluting the proudly waving American flag on the moon remains one of the iconic images of the Apollo 11 mission, a declaration of U.S. supremacy over space race rivals to the Soviet Union. But there's no atmosphere on the moon, no wind. Why is it waving? So look again at the image in particular. Okay, I'm going to have to come back. I'll have to come back to this picture 1 second, and I will continue to read it just so people can see what it is we are showing. I'll grab it back again.
Be interesting to see if they actually. There's a really bad piece of footage where it's going like the clappers.
Okay, so here it is, right here.
That's not the footage I'm talking about. The footage I'm talking about was a transmitted black and white moving footage.
Yes,
with that flag, and you can see it's on a T stand. You got a vertical, and then it's got a bar going out to give it its shape.
Right.
Well, the bottom corner that isn't anchored to anything, the furthest corner away from the pole, the lowest corner, is going back into like nobody's business. And the best argument I've heard for that in the footage is when they stuck it in. Obviously, it then put energy into the flag and the structure. And what you're seeing is that energy still carrying on because there's nowhere for it to go. It's anti-gravity. But I have got to tell you, go and seek out the black and white footage because it definitely looks like it's blowing in the wind to me.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously to a lot of people, if they have to come up through and debunk it. But because it's set up like this, it appears to be waving on the wind. This is what he's saying. Look again at the image. A telescopic pole has been extended along the top in order to make the flag fly proudly. Yeah. So yes, they did think of everything. I could see it. I could see it along the top, but I don't think the top is the question. I think it's everything at the bottom. But because it's been set up like this, it appears to be waving in the wind. All the wrinkles are there because it's literally been sewn or screwed up for 4 days en route to the moon.
Yeah, but in the black and white footage, it is moving. And it's moving footage. It is moving. So that's the basis that you base it on. And again, the same rationale applies. Okay, that is the flag from that moon landing. So the question is, number 1, what the hell is that photograph doing in existence in the first place? Number 2, why is that in color and all the other photographs are black and white? Number 3, it's clearly staged. It's incredibly well lit. And who took the photograph anyway? You'd have to go back to the NASA negatives and have a look who they're claiming took it. But, all of those arguments don't go away. So actually,
I think that's the main, the big one is somebody would have had to have been there to catch it coming in. And
and again, the actual moving footage, what they're doing is they're moving some of the evidence to one side, and they're going, we don't really have this black and white footage of it blowing in the wind, so we'll just not mention that. Oh, look, here's an absolutely superb color photograph. We can debunk it from that. But I'm saying, oh, hang on a minute. Where's the black and white footage? And it's taken from a different angle. If you look at it, actually, the flag is kind of, it's not flat on like that. In the footage, it's at that sort of angle. And the astronaut's kind of here. And he's looking at it, and the flag's doing that. Bottom corner's going like bananas. So, and that's in the black and white footage, which you can actually work out was filmed by a camera on the location of the lander. So it's looking the other way, and that's the footage I'm on about. I'm not on about that. That's just the stage photo. This is the other thing as well. If you look how much of it's actually staged on planet Earth. Yeah, even if they say, well, the photos all went wrong, we didn't get any negatives back, we clearly had to stage it to give something out to the media, something out to the press and all the rest of it. Well, then you can back that argument all the way back up and go, well, so what exactly did you get from the moon? What proof is there? I'll tell you another story because I think it's time for a story. Many, many years ago now, you're going back a long way here. I used to help my mum and dad on antiques fairs over here. And I was in my probably mid-20s going on, so it's a while ago. And I was helping my mum and dad out on this antiques fair. And this lady came round and she said, we got talking about stuff because I was always interested in things like this. Loads of odd stuff on my store because I used to sell all kinds of weird stuff with my mum and dad. And we got chatting. I think I had a little figure of Buzz Aldrin, one of these commemorative figures. And she just came out with it. She just went, I met him. I met Buzz Aldrin. I said, oh, really? She said, yeah. And he gave me this little tiny container with a piece of moon rock in it. And I'm like, wow, that's absolutely amazing. And she said, well, yeah. She said, I was younger then and I met him when I was a little girl. And she described the event she'd met him at and everything, all the rest of it. And he gave me this one piece, she said, and I kept it all my life. And she said, now, so you're going back to whatever it was, 1990s, 1980s, 1990s. She said, now, she said, I had it analysed because I was determined to find out, what this moon rock was. And she said, and it came back as cement, concrete, dyed grey. Now, subsequent to me knowing that story, I don't know if anybody's noticed this, all the moon rock in museums all over the world has vanished. There's no moon rock brought back by the Apollo missions on display virtually anywhere. There just isn't any. It all disappeared in the 1990s. It was all withdrawn from display. And the reason, because remember, I'm an archaeologist, so I know what the museums were up to, is that it was all concrete dyed grey. Now, I know that as a fact. This little girl knew that as a fact, and I'm pretty damn sure NASA knew that was a fact. So
interesting.
The photos are rubbish, the technology's rubbish, the science is rubbish, and the physical evidence is rubbish.
Right.
I can hear the distant sound of this disappearing down the grid. The whole thing's going down the plug hole. And then, like you said, the astronauts, I mean, he gave this little sample to this little girl. The astronauts themselves have been challenged. There's some great footage of this guy, running after, I think it's Buzz Aldrin, and he's running after him in old age going, I've got a Bible. Can you swear on the Bible, on camera that you actually landed? And he turns around and punches this bloke with the camera rather than talk to him. And there's been at least a couple, I mean, again, you'll find this online. There's been a couple of chat shows and a couple of interviews where Buzz Aldrin has slipped. As he's getting older, you can tell he's not holding it together quite as well. And he has slipped and made statements that people have interpreted as, no, we didn't go to the moon. He's kind of put his foot in it. I think he's at the point now where he just doesn't care. You know what I mean? Men in Black take him out. He doesn't care. He's too old now. He's not bothered. So a lot, again, this is another argument. Physical evidence. Physical evidence. It's falling apart at the seams,
But yeah, it's crazy. I'm anxious to see what comments are going to end up.
Oh,
I'm going to meet everybody in the chat room tonight, so we're going to see what's going on. Okay, number 5. If we really went to the moon in 1969, why have we never been back? But apparently this is geopolitics, has nothing to do with conspiracy. You had the Vietnam War. We won the race. It didn't have to go back. Didn't need to return.
Well, the latest statement from NASA, so we're talking 2020, whatever it was, 2021 or 2022 or whatever. It's very, very, very recent. This scientist has gone on record as saying we never went back because we basically forgot how to do it. We lost the technology.
Right.
At which point, me and a lot of other people just fell off our chairs laughing. You know what I mean? Because, boy, have we got technology now that potentially could take us to other planets, but we never had it then. It was never there then. Also, another little story. I work with I'm not going to say how or why, but I work in the music business with a couple of guys who were Russians in the 1980s, 1989, 1990. I was working with this chap who was a Russian. And basically he was saying we never went. The whole thing was staged. We never went. And then you've also got the people now saying, well, the Americans never went either. That was all staged. That was a load of rubbish. Then you got the Chinese jumping in. Well, nobody knows what to believe with China. That's whatever they choose to say is law. That's it. It's the word of the party. Whatever they say, that's it. And then you've also got this latest one with India sending something that looks like a computer-generated Galaxian thing from the 1980s. You expect it to go across the screen, and they're claiming that's what they sent to the moon. It's just not convincing. None of that is convincing. Somebody's probably going to bring up a very good question, though. They're going to say, well, why? It can't just be all this palaver. We've had it for decades. Can't just be to do with, my rocket's better than your rocket. I got to this big rock in space before you did. It can't be all about that. It's not the Kennedy, we're going to land a man on the moon. It can't just be that. Well, the short answer is it's not. It's not just that. Because since the end of the Second World War, NASA is a earthbound technology company coming up with a huge, vast amount of cutting edge technology month by month. They're doing this on a monthly basis. It's what they do.
Right.
And all they've done is dump this massive story out, which basically, a bit like a dog chasing a stick on a beach. Everybody's gone after it. And that's what it is. It's smoke and mirrors. It's on an enormous scale, absolutely enormous scale. Probably the biggest smoke and mirrors in the history of mankind. There you go.
Well, then let me pose this to you. So essentially, that's going back then. Do you still feel that everything that we're seeing, let's face it, Elon Musk, Virgin, they're sending out aircrafts, William Shatner,
well, each individual company has its own particular slant on the PR side of it. Now, Richard Branson, fabulous, started off in the music business. I've got a lot of time for Richard Branson. Has never said that he's got outside the outer Van Allen belt and shot anything into space.
Right. So they're staying on this side of it, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. If you go out into space, you're basically going out into inner space. You're not going into outer space. Okay. Now, Virgin are fantastic because these flights in space and all the rest of it, they're in that sweet zone between the Van Allen belts. That's where they are.
So they're in the safe zone.
Yes, they're not claiming to be anything else. You know what I mean? They're not claiming to do anything else. On the other hand, when you're dealing with people like Musk and that, you're in a different league. They're talking about firing stuff at Mars and firing stuff at, out into outer space. Right. Now, I've got an interesting argument for that, and it's my own. It's something that's only come to me fairly recently. Okay. Right. Okay, somebody sends a satellite out into space. Off it goes. It's sailing off and it lands on the surface of Mars, which is a miracle in itself. Open the parachute, sail down, all this, that, and the other. You're going onto a planet, absolutely nothing about. We can't get to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. Like the planet is covered by oceans, and we still can't get down there.
That have many secrets.
Correct, but we can land a tin can on a planet in the middle of nowhere that we know nothing about. So bearing in mind, that's where we're coming from here. So they land it on the planet and, they start sending all these images back. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. The easiest one is, no, they haven't. It's a desert in Mongolia. That's because you said it at the beginning, there are places out there that don't half look like other planets. So that's your first option. It's just nonsense. But the thing that struck me, and this is where it gets quite interesting, it's really, really interesting. You've got all these signals coming back from all these different things, Voyager leaving the solar system, let's go with that, sending all this information back. Now, anybody anywhere will tell you that is coming back as digital data. It's coming back as zeros and ones. That's how we get it back. Or a combination of digital data that at the end of the day boils down to lots of digits, zeros, numbers, and all the rest of it. Now, our computer capabilities have got better and better and better. So this is good science. They're sending the data back. It's coming back to a computer. They're sat at the computer. The data comes in. And what they do, the best way of looking at this is have a look at the face on Mars. Now, the face on Mars, the data they got back from that comes back and it just looks rubbish. You've never seen anything so bad. The pixels of, the size of a Boeing 747, they're enormous. These huge pixels all over the place, and it doesn't look like a face.
Right.
Then they start to process the data and it comes through and they begin to pull it together. You end up with the famous, really clear face on Mars shot at the end of it. Now, all of what I've just told you, that's astronomers. It's, it's full on, proper. That's how they did it. And they showed you every stage of the way and it's all out there and no problem at all. But this is the problem. Mucking about on a computer with digital data used to be called CGI.
Yes.
Because nobody took that photo.
Right.
There was nobody operating the camera. So let's say, even one of the telescopes down here, let's say, it's just photographed the Crab Nebula or something, and the Crab Nebula comes back. And, Discovery Channel is showing you this amazing piece of graphics where you're flying through the Crab Nebula. No, you're not. You're not. Right. And that applies, this is the kicker, that applies to every single image. All of it has been created by some bloke sat in front of an extremely advanced computer, supposedly decoding this digital information into something that we as human beings could understand and appreciate.
Right.
There's a word for that. And it's a recognized film and television production word. It's called fake. Boomf. Wow. Drops the microphone, walks out of the room. That's where you're at with that. Because at the end of the day, somebody's had to do that. If you want to see the process and you see what's involved, have a look at the face on Mars. It's a great sequence of photographs. They had to release all of the intermediate stages because people were saying, well, there's a civilization on Mars, don't you know? And it's a giant face with a pyramid next to it. And, and they're like, whoa, this has gone a bit too far. We can't let this get out of hand. So we're going to show you exactly how we did it. And they did. And I'm sat there and I'm looking at it and I'm going, CGI. It's flipping Marvel. It's Marvel Universe, it's DC Universe. It's, it's Hollywood.
So you don't believe there's any of these images up there?
Even if, and this is where it really does get to the end of that rabbit hole. Even if they manage to get out there and get all of these images and do all the rest, let's assume everything is working exactly as it's designed to work.
Satellites could do it, no?
Well, yeah, I mean, the telescope can do it. I'm not arguing that the ground-based telescope's doing it. It's picking up data, it's getting photographs. The Hubble telescope has been as far as the edge of the universe.
Yes.
But nobody, not even the guys who operate that telescope, are going to say that anybody took that photo, because they didn't. It's gone through a processing structure that involves in, converting that data into something that makes sense. Right. And then somebody actually colorizing it and composing it and making it, at the end of the day, it's CGI. Nobody, the public are just looking at that going, well, hey, that's a fantastic Polaroid. No, it isn't. Nobody actually took it. Nobody did it. It was done using an incredibly advanced form of technology, and it's been through processing. So, you think about it. I don't know how many millions of people there are, 80 million or whatever on planet Earth. Not a single person's biological eye has ever seen anything, in my opinion, outside of the Van Allen belt. Technology, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, because there's some evidence for that. You're talking about science, you're talking about hard fact. I'm not saying that the Hubble telescope doesn't exist. I'm not saying you can't fly things up into the upper atmosphere. Yes, you can. Yes, there's the space station up there in the sweet zone, this, that, and the other. So I'm not arguing with what they've actually succeeded in doing. Right. I'm just making a point that actually it's not quite as it appears to be.
Right.
To the man in the street. It's not. But it struck me all of it. It's CGI. I don't think anybody would ever deny that as well. I don't think anyone's going to come on and go, blah, 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 that's a load of nonsense. No, because that's what they do. They've admitted that's how they end up with the images. The technology's there, the science is there, it's out on the internet. Whoa, that was it. There you go. That's the second time I've done that tonight.
And I like it when you do that. It makes it interesting. Because there are a lot of images that have surfaced from the moon and from Mars, from satellites. And I mean, could be a lot of pareidolia in them, sure, but there is something that people actually go on Google Images or Google Earth and Google, They go out and they actually capture these images.
Well, I love it because I got it on my feed. You know, people, the latest set of NASA photographs from Mars, you know, surface of Mars, and they're looking in these photographs and they're pulling up, you know, faces of aliens and things that look like tin cans, and there's a cog in this one, there's a slug in this one, there's a rat in that one, you know, and they're coming up with all these different things, and I'm kind of sat there and I'm looking at what I think is possibly a desert in Mongolia, you know, and I'm thinking, well, of course you're going to find bits and bobs like that. And the other one as well, and at this point there's going to be like 10 million geologists all over planet Earth are going to cheer when I say what I'm about to cheer, because we've all thought it. I mean, I am qualified in geology. I did it. So I did it as a subject. I did it in tandem with archaeology when I was doing my professional qualifications. So technically I am a geologist, and I'm looking at those photos on Mars, you know, these photos coming back, and I'm going, well, hang on a minute. That's wind damage, but that's water deposition.
Right.
The layers, the layering, you know, it's been layered in water. And then you look at some of the other things, you look at some of the other volcanic geology and stuff like that, and you think, well, hold on a minute, this is going a bit far, because we don't know if there's live volcanoes up there. We don't know what's going on. We don't know how the winds and how the atmosphere operates up there. That's not necessarily known. You know, water, you can't get some of these features without water. You're looking at the erosion. You know, you're looking at the position of some of the rocks, and you're thinking, you know, you're talking about a planet here that's actually quite a violent planet. You know, it's not quiet and peaceful and nice, you know. So you're going back to whatever people are saying this thing is, and you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, some of these structures that you can see sticking up, it's impossible. It just can't be done. On the other hand, and this is what all the geologists will be thinking, they'll all be looking at these photographs going, well, if that's a desert in Mongolia, that's fine. Got no problems with it at all. It works. You know, we get wind, we get water, we get erosion, we get, you know, this, that, and the other. So I'm going to put my neck on the line here. I am yet to see any photographs. I've seen Venus, I've seen Mars, I've seen Moon, I've seen all this, that, and the other. I am yet to see any photographs that has a structure that you wouldn't be able to find or replicate on Earth.
Right.
I mean, science fiction does it. You have a look at science fiction, look at some of the things that are going on there, and it's like, wow, you know, Brave New World, it doesn't look anything like it, you know. But then all of a sudden, the rest of the universe, everything just looks like us. It's all the same as us. Well, that can't be right. That just can't be right, because your gravity's different, your magnetism's different, your atmosphere's different. You know, there's so many things that are different. There ought to be a significant difference somewhere in what we're seeing. You know, and it's just not happening, you know.
Well, I mean, here's the big question. Why go to these lengths? I mean, of course, everybody wants to say they've done it. You're looking at Cold War tactics. You're looking at all of this. But it seems like a whole lot of effort.
Oh, I don't know. You see, the benefits outweigh the negativity.
Right.
Everything I've just described and everything we've discussed up to this point is actually relatively simple to do.
Right.
You only need one stage set to reproduce the moon. I mean, some of the conspiracy theorists as well who've seen Area 51 and they've looked at it on Google Earth say there's actually a massive grey structure in the desert next to Area 51. They think that's the moon set. They reckon it was filmed on a moon set in the desert at Area 51. I don't necessarily go along with that, but they you know, there are people who've said that's where it is. That's relatively cheap. Doesn't cost much to do that. The consequences are, though, that you've then got this narrative that you can use for politics, you can use it for economics, you can use an argument that can change an entire society, which it has, generation after generation after generation. You know, it works in every single different respect. It works for money, it works for science, it hides technology. You know, I mean, some of the conspiracy theorists will say it even hides the fact that we've been contacted by aliens. You know, it hides the fact that the planet doesn't operate the way that we think it operates. You know, it's a popular narrative to disguise the truth. You know, yeah, you can go into any area, go into your science, your economics, your politics, you literally go into any area and it kind of has benefits. You know, it ticks a box in one way or another. So it almost begs the question, why not? Why not do it? Why not create something like that? There is a precedent for that, of course. In the past, in history, they've always used religion to do that. They've created a narrative, they put it forward in a particular way, and ta-da, there you go. So there's always been, something going on that isn't as it appears to be. And this is just the technological version of that. They've just took the next step,
Right, right. So the space shuttle, they've been going on for, years and years and years and years. Are they just going into the safe zone and staying within there? Is this, is it going on today, or are they actually going, in your opinion?
Well, they never hid the space shuttle, to be honest. Hats off to NASA. The idea was to create a reusable spacecraft.
Yes.
And 110%, that's what they did. Right. And basically, they threw a craft up into that gap in the upper atmosphere where they could do all kinds of things. They can test stuff. They can muck about with stuff. They can see what the effects are. But no space shuttles ever went outside the outer Van Allen belt. None of them ever did that. They're in that sweet zone. Excuse me. And as we noticed earlier on, they had problems doing that. That ultimately resulted in them saying, well, this is no longer economic. Tiles blowing off, things not coming down the way they should, And also, I rather suspect that somebody somewhere said there are too many bits of space shuttle now flying around in the sweet zone. You know what I mean? I think there were bits dropping off, bits getting lost, drop a spanner and it goes flying off, and, and all this, that, and the other. And they're saying, well, actually, we're working against ourselves, because a lot of the debris that we're chucking up there is going to mean we can't get up there anymore, So I think that's probably the reason they're backing off. Is, we've created that much junk and rubbish down here on planet Earth. We're doing the same thing up in the atmosphere now, and it's becoming a problem. One argument is that they're waiting for it to all come down, because ultimately it will spiral down in gravity and burn up in the atmosphere. Maybe that's why I was seeing so many, quote, UFOs. This footage you get of stuff coming down in the atmosphere, and clearly it's burning up.
Right.
That, I think that's what they're doing. I think they're waiting for a lot of it to come down to get rid of it, because it's causing problems. I'm trying to be very scientific about this.
No, I like it. I like it. I like the whole direction that everything is going in. So I have to ask this then: if the technology isn't there, what do you make of a lot of this alleged back engineering, or, bringing over even Nazi scientists and taking, because, keeping with the science thing, and they start, because we know Hitler did have little like flying machines, and a lot of those scientists came to the United States afterwards. And to not have the technology after the war was done, and having these scientists working on this stuff,
we've kept this as a kind of unspoken narrative through all the interview, because at no point have I ever said NASA is anything but a technology company. That's what they are.
Exactly. I just want to throw it out there, because
they exist solely for this. And back to your previous question, which you just asked, is what are they hiding? Well, that's one of the things they're hiding. Clearly they are a technology company that have so many secrets. I mean, they're throwing out patents that you wouldn't believe. They're patenting, so many devices. And there is this entire thing of, well, how far have they gone? What have they got? I think the guy from Skunk Works, the director of Skunk Works, retired in the 1990s. And he said, if you can think it, imagine it, we're doing it.
Yeah.
1990s.
I know.
I think that quote was, and that's in the 1990s. Well, we're like 30 odd years plus further on than that. So if we can imagine it, I can imagine a lot. Trust me, I've got a very, very vivid imagination. And they're already saying they can do all that. So it's perfectly valid to say that actually Operation Paperclip, and the crash of Roswell, etc., etc. I mean, that I've said this in a couple of interviews now. We look at things that have, developed over the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, our lifetime, maybe 60 years. Well, Roswell's 1947. You're talking about nearly 100 years.
Right.
That's a huge amount of time.
Right.
That's a massive amount of time to develop stuff. I'd be amazed if they haven't gone further than we can imagine. You know,
Well, the reason I'm mentioning it is because think about when the moon landing happened, and if they were, engineering some of this stuff through, let's say, German scientists, or let's say even back engineering from the 40s, wouldn't it be just a little bit possible that they could do it?
Okay, that argument.
Hence
That
why
argument, yeah,
I'm coming
it
back
kind
to
of
it.
it goes in two directions
Right.
because
Because I like to play with you that way.
yeah, but it's great, it's brilliant because one direction means that anybody that argues that kind of shoots themselves in the
Right.
foot. Because the
Right.
question is, if they were doing all that, they were back engineering it, and they had UFOs, they had all this, that, and that, why did they do such a cack-awful job of faking the moon landing? Why? Because technically they should be miles ahead. 1960s, they should have, it was so badly done. There
Right.
should be, I mean, people in science fiction, like, flipping at, Buck Rogers and, Battlestar
But could it be to
Galactica.
hide what was really going on?
Well, Star Wars was 1977. They did a better job of faking
Yeah.
sci-fi.
You should have hired George Lucas, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the
Right.
argument. Science fiction was doing a better job of faking it than NASA were. So if they had the technology to do it in real life, why didn't they do it in real life, or at least make a better job of faking it? That's one really strong argument. And then the other side of it, which goes the other way, is, okay, let's assume they do have that technology. Let's go down that avenue and say, right, two UFOs crash at Corona. So they've got two to go at. That's the reality of it. One's got bodies, the other one's got the technology. Right. It goes to Edwards Air Force Base and they start back engineering it. Off they go, right? So they've got it. They can play with it.
Right.
And then somebody comes along, because they've got one of these things actually hovering, let's say, by the 1950s, and somebody comes along and goes, we're really going to have to do something so that we don't have to tell people this is real. We're really going to have to do something to stop this getting out. Right. Because the Chinese are going to get it, the Russians are going to get it, everyone's going to get it, and then all of a sudden we're going to have mass panic. There's a good argument for faking the moon landing. There's a good argument for, don't look at this hand, look at this hand. Forget, UFOs and all the rest of it. Right. Have a look at moon landings. Let's go down that. Kennedy comes out and goes, I mean, the first ever documentary on, shall we go to the moon? 58 or whatever, they did this massive documentary on potential technology and all the rest of it, presented by Walt Disney. That tells you all you need to know. Yeah, it's all there. In the 1950s, you probably go and find the program. Walt Disney, so it's like they.
Yeah, but he was like ahead of himself with Epcot Center and with
But this is late 1950s, so
getting frozen.
You're within 10 years. You're within 10 years of the Roswell
cryogenics
crash.
And stuff. Yeah,
it wouldn't surprise me. Like I say, if somebody in NASA just put their hand up and went, "We're really going to have to cover this up," and somebody said, "Who can we use?" I know. Walt Disney. There you go. Boom, straight in at the beginning.
Right.
And you can put these pieces together. When you start piecing it together, you can begin to see.
Right.
I'm not arguing that, back engineering, Operation Paperclip,
right.
It's fine. I've got no problems with that. That is very possible. Whether the UFOs are us or whether it's them or whether it's reverse engineered, I have no argument with any of that. All those things are possible. Right. But the moon landing is the cover up. I'm fairly convinced of that. It's prove me wrong.
I'm of this mind as well, and I think we've come to learn this a lot just in society over decades and decades. But usually, when there's something major going on, there's going to be something else to take as a distraction to take you away from what they don't really want you to pay attention to. So I don't know. I mean, I believe if the technology is there, then, and I'll backtrack a little bit with the technology thing. You have heard, of course, the story that Gene Roddenberry allegedly met with extraterrestrials called the Council of Nine, and they figured he would be the perfect person. For example, Star Trek introduced us to do this experiment to see how people react to having, this type of travel, extraterrestrial beings working with humans. And of course, it took off. And before his death, he was supposed to go back and meet again And I guess the experiment was supposed to continue or something was supposed to happen, but he passed before he did. So, this is a thing. So there's obviously they knew that something was definitely, I think that maybe we're being prepped for something. So I don't know. Is there something that we're missing because of the distraction, or perhaps, was this just like we're going to film them as they're prepping to go to the moon and never show them what's on the moon for real?
See, if you go down that route, so let's kind of jump out of the position we're in into the camp of the people who actually put that argument forward. So let's put ourselves in their position.
Okay.
A lot of these people believe in channeling. They believe in the Akashic records. They believe in abductions, close encounters of the third, fourth kind, etc., etc. All of that. So taking all of that into consideration, if we put ourselves in their position, then it has been reported over a number of decades that the aliens are saying, do not accept the first thing that comes along. If you see the president on the White House lawn holding hand in hand with a grey, then chances are that grey's genetically engineered, it's man-made, and it's a fake. Do not accept any of the first things that come along.
So this is all misinformation.
Yeah, so the argument is that even the aliens themselves have arrived at the position that, I mean, X-Files, for goodness sake, I know they never nailed the colours to the mast, half of it was us, half of it was them. Well, that is a true position. If you look at the technology, you look at what's going on in ufology, you look at all this kind of thing, there's always the real thing. I mean, the great one, there's always the real thing and there's always the fake. The great one is the crop circle thing, because I've just appeared on Ancient Aliens over here doing crop circles for them. And you watch that program from start to finish and it's like, yeah, obviously half of it's real because we couldn't possibly have done it. There's no argument with real ones. We cannot do them. But there is a set of them that are fakes and they actually admit that they're fakes. And they're pretty good. You can't, but that's what we as human beings do. Very often we end up with the real thing.
We emulate, right?
It takes off, it becomes commercial, it becomes popular or whatever. Then all of a sudden we find the need to create fakes. And capitalize on it. Well, the aliens, basically, the people that are channeled, the entities, the beings, the interdimensionals, however you want to label it, they're saying exactly the same thing. They say, don't believe the fakes because you're going to get clobbered with fakes. You go down a different one, go down the religious one, Nostradamus, the prophets, Revelation, the Bible, Edgar Casey, any of them, you name it, they all say the same thing. Do not believe the fakes. Don't. So, if you kind of approach it from that angle, you get in what is essentially the same story.
The same idea.
And I'm willing to go along with that for the simple reason that actually the evidence backs that up. It does look like there's a lot of fakery going on, so take a deep breath and stand back, don't take the first thing that comes along. Very good point, actually. Thanks for bringing that up. That is an incredibly good point. Because I don't argue with anybody that can come forward with evidence, and a lot of these people who are channelers, I've seen things in my lifetime that, prove to me. I'm going to tell you a story. It doesn't really relate to the moon landing, but you're going to love this story. It goes all the way back to the 1980s. I was still working professionally in the music business, and I had a friend who was a guitar player. Now, no disrespect to guitar players, but there are an awful lot of them. And this teenage guy really wanted to become a superstar and make it in the music business. So I'm kind of helping him out. I'm giving him contacts and pointing him in the right direction and this, that, and the other. And I go around his house one night and I meet his mum. Now his mum is severely disabled. She has every problem you can imagine. She can't write. She can't do mathematics. She has trouble speaking. Nowadays, it would be like ADHD, ADD, ODD, everything, every letters you can imagine. She's all over the place, but this is the 1980s. She can just about live at home. And she's sat there quietly in the lounge, and he gets his guitar out, we're jamming, we're playing, we're talking music. And all of a sudden, she just comes out with it out of the blue. And she just said something like, "They came to visit me again last night."
Ooh.
Yeah. Now you can see where the topic suddenly changes. Now, the guitar lad didn't know that I had an interest in that kind of thing. So none of it was staged. It was not fixed. So
Right.
I said, oh, I was like, yeah, somebody came to see you last night. She's like, yeah. She says they come and tap on my window, and I open the window, and there's 2 or 3 of them, and 1 or 2 of them come in, and they tell me things. Now I can imagine a lot of the listeners at this point would be out the front door. You know, she's crackers. You know, they'd be gone. You wouldn't see us, but not me. And I'm like, tell me more. And she describes, basically, cutting a long story short, she describes greys. And the idea is every now and again these greys turn up, you know. And then this lad chips in and says, yeah, my mum writes down what they say. Whoa, now we're in a different place now. We're in
I want in.
League, you know.
Right.
And eventually I get it out of her that what she's doing is she's making notes. She's writing down whatever she gets told. She's writing down. She's putting it into clip files, and she hides the clip files. I'm assuming she hides them under the bed, but she wouldn't tell anybody where they were. None of the family knew where these clip files were. So I said, any chance I can have a look at one of these files? And she's like, yeah. And she comes wandering down with this tatty looking clip file, you know, with loads of these pieces of paper slipped into plastic files. And I open it like that, wham, straight away. First thing I'm looking at, black holes, Newtonian physics, Einsteinian equations, you know, and honestly, it left me behind in seconds. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is super duper important stuff. This is evidence that she could not possibly have produced it. Absolutely could not have done it. And I'm looking at something that's either channeled or it's extraterrestrials physically appearing and dictating this. So at this point, I kind of read through it. Mind completely exploded. All sorts of stuff in there to do with frequencies, stuff that I've subsequently found out Tesla was working on, all kinds of stuff. You know, every time I go anywhere science-wise, I'm stumbling over something that I found in one of these files. And you know, I'm looking at it, and so I waited until she kind of shuffled off, and I was alone with this lad, and I just said, look, I said, doesn't matter what happens from this point on. I said, you have got to keep those files. You have got to keep them. Now, this is where the story goes a bit bonkers, because I lost contact with him, as you do with people in the music business. I went one way, he went another way. And eventually, I think it was 2000 and odd, I heard that his mum had died. She didn't live much past 50 odd, you know what I mean? Late 40s, early 50s, she died. I'm going to take a stab at it being cancer as well. So these entities were not good in that respect. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that he kept the files, that at the end of the day that they found them and they didn't get rid of them, because some of the stuff in there was just nuts. Now, I had that experience. I can only relay that as a story, obviously, because we don't have the files. I really wish we had got the files. You can tell how frustrated I am. But at the end of the day, that's evidence.
Yes.
You know, so somebody comes to me and go, you know, I'm channeling whatever, aliens, whatever. I'm like, well, yeah, I've run across that before. I've seen this before. I'm not a skeptic in that sense. I am a convert to that idea, you know, that things can come through from somewhere else because of evidence. You know, I've seen it. I've actually seen it. And that's not popularly known. She wasn't doing it for attention. You know, there was no involved. She wasn't writing a book. There was, you know, nothing like that. She was the last person on planet Earth you would ever have thought would have ever done that.
Right. And yet there it was.
There we have it. Yeah, there it was. So back to the subject in hand, you know, there's a lot going on. There is an awful lot going on, and they do have reasons to cover quite a lot of that up, you know. I wasn't going to tell that story. That's come out of nowhere. There you go.
I like it.
Your switchboard is going to light up tomorrow.
Like, what?
Your fingers are going to be hot.
I know. I'll be busy tonight in the chat. So basically then, I guess you have this story where I think was it one of the astronauts, was it Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin, where they dropped something on the moon and it just resonated like a big bell. So I guess you can't even put any sort of credence to that because you...
Hollow moon. Is it a space station? Yeah, it's the hollow moon theory.
Yeah, that's right.
I have run across that frequently. There's a nice... I can just give you a few factoids for that. I mean, the reason it's come about is the fact that when the moon orbits the Earth, it always faces us the same way.
Right.
So the argument is, how can you have a celestial body stuck onto another one that just goes around with the same face? You know, that is a bit odd. I'll be honest, it is a bit odd. There are reasons why. I won't go into them. We'll be here all night. There are reasons why it's
like, I don't know, Death Star.
Well, that's you've nailed it. That's where the idea comes from. You know what I mean? That it's a space station and it's piloted. It's simpler than that. It's back to what we were talking at the beginning about the Earth's gravitational pull, magnetism, different Van Allen belts, etc. It's sucked on and stuck on the same way as everything else. But, and this is where it gets interesting, when they did the Antarctica survey, which was done by the American survey team, so hats off to you guys for this one. They went over Antarctica and they fired radar in to try and find out what the landmass below Antarctica is all about. You're probably familiar with this because what they came up with, they already knew that the Gulf of Mexico was a big crater. It's a big meteorite crater. They came up with another crater under Antarctica 3 times bigger than the Gulf of Mexico. It's so big that they think that whatever it was came in sideways. So it didn't hit the ball. It was a glancing blow. It took the bottom off the globe. And that is what they think the moon is. Because the total mass of the moon is approximately the same as what's missing from the crater under Antarctica. So that's the kind of the latest thinking on this.
That is very fascinating to me because it surely would make sense then if people are seeing statues or images maybe on the moon from prior civilizations that were actually here.
Yeah, and it does make sense because if something comes in and sort of takes the bottom off the ball, and it goes boom, and ends up as fragments, then those fragments ultimately could coalesce. They could gather together to form what we now have as the moon. You know, possible.
Okay, let me play a little bit more. There is also a theory, and this might actually just answer that question or not. But there's a theory that there were once 2 moons. There's literature out there where they basically remember the day that the other moon came in or left.
Well,
on that?
You
know anything? No?
Well, I was going to say, if you can get 1 moon, then you can get 2. Or was the other moon, did it coalesce into the one we've got now? Where did that mass disappear? Again, it could have been all the debris that was chucked out from the impact in the Gulf of Mexico, which they think was the dinosaur killer. Well, that would have chucked stuff up into the atmosphere that blacked us out for 3 years. You know, it's a nuclear winter. Where did all that stuff go? Did it just come raining back down, or did that gather into something which then subsequently broke up? You know, I think there's a lot of stuff gone on in the past that either we don't know about or is not fully admitted. You know, because again, it's this. You know, what do you believe? I mean, if everyone's like, well, you know, it's 100 million years ago since whatever happened, then everyone's like, yeah, we don't have a problem with that. On the other hand, if something like a massive meteorite comes in, look at the Tunguska blast, which was, you know, they thought that was a comet, and that goes, you know, and we're in serious trouble. That's historical. You know, that's happened in historical times. Would it cause mass panic? Are they trying to get some form of control in there, the same as they would if we had an alien invasion? You know, who knows? And at the end of the day, you know, if something's going to come in and smack us one, then it's going to come in and smack us one. Always tickles me up when they put in the, I think it was SETI. I'm pretty sure it was SETI, when they were watching for, you know, meteorites and asteroids coming in. The reason they set all of that system up was that some bright spark spotted this massive meteorite, but they only spotted it when it was going away from us. So this thing had come sailing past, you know, in and we hadn't even noticed it was coming.
Right.
So, you know, at that point, they're like, yeah, I think we really need to be keeping a better lookout. You know, we need to be keeping an eye on what's going on up there. Because we missed it completely, you know. So I think that is where we're at now, where we're realizing that, you know, stuff does come flying in fairly regularly. But most people, they don't want most people to know that because it would cause mass panic. You know, it would upset people.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of theories right now, you know, with the sun going, you know, supernova, especially with all these CMEs. You have people watching CMEs pretty religiously.
I don't think anything's going to happen to the sun anytime soon. You know, I think the bodies we've got, the celestial bodies, I think they're pretty much fixed as they are certainly for our time scale. You know, but there's lots of little tiny bits of stuff whizzing around that, you know, does what it wants to do.
Right.
You know.
But nothing big enough to throw that big old moon right back where it started.
Hopefully not, you know.
Oh, God.
Hopefully not. It's funny, actually, because nothing down here would work if we didn't have the moon stuck where it is.
It's true.
You know, it's back to this concept of intelligent design and, you know, structure and mathematics and stuff. Everything only works because it works. Take something out and the whole lot just falls apart. So, but that's a topic for another night.
I know we always end up just like around everywhere, but at the end of the day, you know, we pretty much make sure we cover everything we're supposed to cover. So basically, the moon landing is in your perspective, is a no-go.
Yeah,
just no.
It is so easy to prove that it didn't happen, and yet so difficult, knocking on for impossible to prove that it did. That's a nice summary, I think, for my position.
Right. Because there's one little thing I'll read here, which says a final nail in the coffin of the moon hoax theories is a simple instrument installed 50 years ago.
Ah, the laser theory.
Yeah. Yes. Now, they say, of course, you know, during their day on the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin planted a lunar laser ranging retroreflector array on the surface, and it's still operational today, and it allows us to reflect lasers off of it and measure the distance to the moon down to the centimeter. We simply could not do this if we had not visited the moon.
Okay, yeah. I don't have any problem leaving a mirror up there, and I also don't have any problem bouncing something off the lunar surface, because clearly it's there. I'm not going to suddenly go, hey, that's, you know, that's a hologram. Some people have done that. Some people have tried to make out that the moon's a projection. Well, I don't think that's the case. So bouncing a laser off the moon's surface, I don't have any problem with that at all. Whether or not it's bouncing off a specific mirror, or whether they're just bouncing it off a location that they've been given, that's a different issue altogether, entirely.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I thought I'd throw it out there because, you know.
I'll be honest, that is a pretty good piece of evidence. It is a pretty good piece of evidence, and the science for that does stack up as well. But how reliable that is, you know, who knows?
Because, well, I mean, they say that there are spacecrafts from China, India, and Japan who have also spotted these landing sites. Providing further independent verification of the landings. It was captured, you know, well, we have the rovers, you have all kinds of different things, I guess. But the dark squiggly paths that the astronauts' footprints have made, how do we know it's the astronauts and not aliens? That's what I want to know.
Well, we could go on a long time on those additional subjects. We really could.
I know. But I had to throw that last one in because I thought, okay, that one's a little bit tough to you know.
That's the hardest one to debunk. But, but it doesn't debunk the fact that you can bounce a laser off the moon. It doesn't. The argument there would be in minor details as to how it's done.
Right. Yeah. Well, I love it. I think we've had a lot of fun, and we've managed to cover a lot of ground, as always. So what do you have coming up? Let's
okay. I'm doing a UFO thing in Birmingham. So if anyone's in the UK, MUFON, go and have a look at the MUFON site. I'm doing that, you know, I think it's in June or July. So I'm down there. I've got a couple of books on the go. I'm going to try and get one out to do with the biblical stuff that I've always talked about. That's coming. I think that's going to be next year. And then I'm hoping to do one on magic as well. What is it? You know, is it relevant to the 21st century? How do you do it? You know,
Are you going to include any of the old ancient mystery schools?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. See, right.
You can see where I'm going there.
Yes. I know, I do.
Completely different subject matter. Yeah.
I know. I saw this. Yeah, I like that. Okay. And anything else?
That's pretty much it. Like I said, I'm on Ancient Aliens Crop Circles, season 19, episode 2.
Okay.
You can find that. And then if you go on the internet and put in Lost Treasures, Mark Olly Lost Treasures on YouTube, you'll find all the back catalogue, because we managed to get the back catalogue up last year. So there's a lot of like older material with me on it. You can go and binge watch that. I think it's about 10 or 11 or 12 hours worth of stuff you can go and watch. But there's loads of that on there that you can find.
I love it. Well, I have to say it again. Thank
Oh,
you.
and let me say, books on Amazon, and come and find me on Facebook. There you go.
Okay, perfect. We'll put a link to that. So we'll do that for you. So thank you for joining us. And
Pleasure.
I will man the chat rooms tonight. And
let me know how it goes.
I will, because you always leave me to pick up the pieces. You come on and you just blurt all this stuff out. And I'm just like, oh, here we go. Here we go. But it's always a pleasure. And I know, we'll talk and we'll get more shows.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks for having me.
I love it.
I'll be back.
As always. So we shall sign off. Well, everybody, we've come to the end of another definitely fantastic segment, a little controversial. Don't shoot the messenger, but it was definitely a lot of food for thought. So big thank you to Mark Olly for enlightening us on some topics, and did my best to hold my own. There we go. Big thank you to Folgers Coffee for sponsoring tonight's show and every night's show. Big thank you to Justice Nicker, a.k.a. Dr. Stick the Sonic Surgeon, for providing us with his music and his voice for the intro that you heard at the beginning of the show. Big thank you to Steve McGinnis for all of the artwork that he has contributed to the show. So thank you, thank you. Next week, Wednesday night, we welcome back Ron Morehouse, and he's going to be talking about his new book, Bigfoot Unveiled. Yeah. So go check out his archive. It's been played a couple of times here on the show. You'll find it, in the YouTube archives. Just spectacular. Thursday night is my dear friend and our UPRN radio host colleague, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, a very gifted lady. And she's going to be discussing pretty much anything deemed paranormal, high strangeness. It's going to be a lot of fun and informative. She has a show here on the network called Spirit Switchboard. It's on every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And she has great guests, and she's just a whole lot of fun. So tune in, and you don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss all the fun ones too, like this one.
Oh, yeah.
I know, right? Anyway, guys, have a terrific weekend. Behave yourselves, and we'll see you next week. Good night.
Bye for now.